Yo, my name is Sebastian Savela. So what does being rich mean to you? What about being wealthy? Or do you think they're the same thing? So if you're making more than $400,000 a year, does that mean that you're rich or you're wealthy? What about 5 million? So according to most people in the finance world, there's a clear distinction between the two. If you're making a lot of money, you're considered rich, but wealth, it takes into consideration how much of it you could keep. In Rich Dad Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki says that wealth is measured in time, not in dollars. And he gives his definition. Wealth is the number of days you can survive without physically working and still maintaining your desired standard of living. If you're making $1 million a year and you're spending $1 million a year, then you would be considered rich but not wealthy because you have to keep working to sustain that lifestyle. If you're spending $4,000 a month and you're living comfortably and you have investments that are paying you $4,000 a month, then you will be considered wealthy because you could stop working at your job and your investments will keep funding your monthly expenses indefinitely. So based on that definition, being wealthy doesn't necessarily mean that you have to make a boatload of money. The way you spend it is what will determine how wealthy you become. So what stops everyone from being wealthy? So like I said before, it comes down to our spending habits. So I read this article by this author named Stanley Riggs from Business Insider, and he did a great job explaining that concept. So he had 3 different pictures showing how the poor, the middle class slash rich, and the wealthy spend their money and how those decisions affect their financial positions. Before we get into it, let me first define a couple terms. So let's first talk about assets. An asset is anything that puts money in your pocket, preferably every month. So anything that's paying you without you having to be there. Examples of assets are income generating real estate, stocks, mutual funds, or ETFs that are paying dividends and or interest, CDs, bonds. All of these last 2 don't pay much, but you don't have to do any work for it. So here we're talking about assets that already have systems and procedures in place so that your presence isn't needed to continue making money. Now, liability is anything that takes money out of your pocket and usually monthly. So anything that you keep paying money for, but that doesn't pay you back. So things like car payments, credit cards that you're paying interest on, consumer loans, or even a mortgage. Yes, when you buy a home, you're building equity, but if you lose your job, that mortgage payment will start depleting all your savings. Passive income is the money that you make without having to work for it. So when you invest in a dividend paying stock, they pay you dividends without you having to do anything after your initial investment. Another example of passive income could be in real estate. So let's say you and your investment partner decided to buy a 20-unit building and put property managers and systems in place to take care of the day-to-day business. So you don't really have to do anything. So you might look at a couple reports every month to see how the business is doing and make adjustments as needed, but that's about it. So an income from that building is considered passive because you don't actively have to be present. Financial freedom, or being financially independent, is when the income from your investment surpasses your monthly expenses. So if you spend $4,000 a month and your investments get to a point where they're making more than $4,000 from dividends or interest or cash flow, then you become financially independent. That means you no longer have to work a 9 to 5 to support your lifestyle. Okay, so now that you understand all that, let's take a look at the cash flow pattern of a poor household. Okay, so there are 2 different sections to look at. The income statement, which looks at income and expenses, and the balance sheet, which looks at assets and liabilities. So the lines, they represent the flow of money. So the thicker they are, the more money flows through them. So here we can see that most of the earned income is spent on living expenses like rent, utilities, unexpected expenses, and so on. Because there's barely enough money coming in, there's not enough to afford liabilities or stuff. If there is, it would probably go to something like a cheap car, and even if that car is bought in cash, it still creates additional expenses like gas, maintenance, insurance, etc. At that stage, you can't even save because you're not making enough money. You barely have enough to get by, and a lot of times your expenses are more than your income, and you end up getting into debt. So if you're in that situation, the only way to get ahead really is to make more money, like finding a better paying job or finding a job with more potential for growth. Maybe that means more education or improving on a skill to get a better job than the one that you have. So here we have the cash flow pattern of the middle class and the rich, which is the spending behavior of most people. So as you can see, it's very similar to poor households. The major difference is that they make more money and are able to afford more things. So as you can see, they spend money on regular bills too, but most of their income is spent on liabilities. Because they can afford it, they pay for a house, then a second one by the beach, multiple cars, boats, etc. So you can also see that nothing is going to the asset box. The money comes in and disappears on buying stuff. So people in that group make decent money. Like the average income in the US is around $60,000. So that's enough income to be able to save and invest a significant amount of money, but most people don't. You spent all your childhood and adolescence not being able to pay for anything. Maybe all you had was a part-time job. Then after college, you get a decent paying job, and that new influx of money is exciting. So all the things that you always wanted to get, all the trips that you always wanted to take, now feels possible. Everywhere you look on TV, billboards, or social media, everyone's trying to sell you something. And when you look at your friends and coworkers, they have nice cars, beautiful apartments, and they go out all the time. You feel like you can and should also live that life. I mean, after all, you work hard and you deserve it, right? And that's the trap right there. All the joy that you get from these material things is short-lived, so then you're trying to buy the next thrill. So that behavior becomes a habit, and now you've accumulated all these bills that you need to keep up with. So you can't quit your job because that's your only source of income. So if you quit your job, you're not making any money. If you're not making any money, you can't pay your bills. So you get stuck in that cycle of just working for money, and you feel like you can never leave. So that's the rat race. So it's this cycle of constantly working to make more money and still living paycheck to paycheck. So you could be a minimum wage earner, you could be a school teacher, a doctor, or a millionaire professional athlete. But if your spending habits look like this, then you can never build wealth or become financially free. So finally, let's look at the cash flow pattern of the wealthy. Here you can see that little goes towards living expenses. I mean, that doesn't mean that you don't spend money on things that makes you happy. Entertainment is for the monthly expenses. But most of the income is invested into buying income producing assets. Most of that passive income is reinvested into buying more assets, which will make more passive income. Now, once you start making enough of your investment, you could afford those liabilities. You could buy that new car, that second house, or 5 vacations a year if you want to. If you can't do that long enough, your net worth will get higher and higher, and you could get to a point where your money, the principal, so the money that you kept investing all these years, the part that you put in never runs out. You live completely off your return, and most importantly, you'll get your freedom back. So as you can tell, getting out of the rat race and reaching financial freedom, whether that's in 10 or 30 years, as a concept is not hard to understand. Now, having the discipline and consistency to keep learning and to keep investing both in yourself and in your assets for an extended period of time is. I mean, I get it. Spending your money on something that you want and getting that instant gratification is so much easier than keep putting your money somewhere and not being able to enjoy it for 15 plus years. That future so far down the line is hard to grasp. All that being said, I don't mean to say that all investments are foolproof. I mean, I know a lot of people's anxiety when it comes to investing stems from uncertainty or unpredictability. But if you could commit to educating yourself, then you could minimize those risks and you could one day get out of the rat race. That's all I got for today. If you think this video was helpful, like, comment, share, tag a friend, or subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next week. Peace!